Let's wrap up July. All right, hello. Let's wrap up July, everybody. My name is Trinity. This is Portable Magic. Welcome if you are new here. Welcome back if you are not. I have some stats. As you guys know, I was looking for 5 stars through all of July. That was my goal. I read everything with the anticipation of it being 5 stars. And so I'm happy to report we were successful. There are a few 5 stars to be talked about in this video. So for the month of July, I read 15 books and DNF'd 2, bringing me to 6,294 pages. Whoop, whoop. This is the highest I have had all month. It is strange to me because I knew in July my husband was going to be on vacation for 2 weeks, and that was probably going to hinder what I was able to read. It actually turned out it was not. We spent our week at home just kind of chilling, laying out by our tiny pool that we have, and in a hammock, listening to books, listening to music for them, just chillaxing. We did kind of venture through our city and go out and eat at new places every night, but really we didn't do much else. And so it was a really great chill staycation. And I'm pretty excited about the fact that I was able to read 13 books. Well, 15 and DNFing 2 of them. So, that's pretty exciting. Okay, so I have done something because I was convinced that I was in a reading slump, and if you guys have been watching my videos, you'll realize that I realized what the reading slump was caused by. So I broke up my fantasy and fantasy romance, and to show you guys, I'll put the graphic up on the screen. I'm at 25% of my reads being fantasy romance. That is really high for me, but that does mean I'm still at 50% fantasy, and I don't necessarily think about fantasy romance when I think about fantasy burnout, nor do I separate them, but in separating them, I realized that's where my burnout was coming from. It was coming from the fact that I've read so many fantasy romance. And yeah, 25% is really high. I do want to get some more sci-fi, some more horror, some more mystery thriller on the books because I am a little bit burnt out, but not quite as bad as I was, which you guys have seen those videos. I don't need to rehash that here. Length of the books that I'm reading has remained the same. My owned book percentage of what I'm reading has gone up a little bit, not as much as I would like it to, but kind of going to be working on that in the month of August. If you guys have seen my August TBR, you know what's going on and why I'm making the push to read more books off of my owned shelves. I'm still really wanting to get the book box books read too, but they are a different statistic simply because they are not books that I sought out on my own. They are still books that I own though. We are holding strong at an average 4-star rating. That makes me really happy because I was concerned whenever my average rating dropped to a 3.3 at one point. I was like, this is not good. But we are bringing that number back up. And a good majority of what I'm reading is still from 2023 or 2024. That is a stat that I track because I do want to stay on top of new releases for you guys. Part of that is I've been trying to stay on top of my arcs recently. And a stat that I totally forgot to share with you guys last month, which should have been kind of a mid-year wrap up. I'm still reading 83.8% by women authors. And yeah, I don't think that's a stat that's ever really going to change for me. I have an affinity for women authors, and that's all I have to say about that. Although, my favorite author is actually male, but, whatever. All right, let's get into the books I've read. Just like with any other wrap up that I have, the ones that I've talked about in videos past, I'm probably not going to go over in detail. But to start my month off with, I read one of my most anticipated reads of the year, S.T. Gibson's Evocation, and I was disappointed, guys. I was disappointed. I gave this book 3 stars. One of the big issues that I had with it is the representation of polyamory. I'm friends with a few polyamorous people. I wrote my own polyamorous story, and I had input from the people that I know that are polyamorous in writing that story. And there was one part of the book that really rubbed me the wrong way. Like I said, I talked about this in a wrap up, so I won't go in detail here, but I just didn't like it. I didn't like the relationship. I didn't like the way polyamory was represented in this book, and I'm done with S.T. Gibson. I still love A Dowry of Blood, but I don't think I'm going to be reading anything else by her because An Education in Malice is not something I'm even remotely interested in. I don't like dark academia that much, and I've heard mixed things. I've also heard I'm not going to like it. There was a book that I read recently that I got pretty much the same feedback that I did for this book, and so not interested. And I'm very sad about that fact. So next, I read for my Patreon vlog, The Sun and the Void by Gabriela Romero LaCruz. I ended up really liking this. I gave it 3.5 stars though, because the writing style reminded me of Stephen King, and it was very hard for me to get into. I don't like the meandering plot lines. I don't like the verbose language, things like that. The things that reminded me of Stephen King they weren't things I was going to enjoy. However, there is a point in this book where it picks up and takes off, and I liked it from that point on. I'm going to say around the page 200, which I was pushing myself to read this because it was for a Patreon vlog, but I was very pleasantly surprised by the end. Two women embark on an unforgettable quest in the sweeping fantasy debut inspired by the history and folklore of South America. And we have two women who are of mixed race, fantasy races in this story, and they're kind of looked down on, shunned a bit, treated poorly in their world, but there's a prophecy that surrounds these women, and they go seeking it out, figuring out what all is real, what all is known, what all is to come, all of that stuff, and I ended up really enjoying it. The next book that I read would be one of my 5 stars for the month, and that's The Bound Worlds by Megan E. O'Keefe. This is my favorite sci-fi series of all time, and it is technically a perfect series for me because all 3 books have garnered 5 stars. I cried. This was beautiful. I loved it. I talked about it quite a bit in my weekly wrap-up and in my Patreon vlog. So this is the ending to a great series. It is emotional. It is fast-paced. I highly recommend Megan E. O'Keefe, especially if you like Essa Hansen, Lyndon A. Lewis, any of those. I devoured it. It was so good. It was so good. 5 stars. And the next 5-star, Murder Road by Simone St. James. I loved this. I ate it up. I loved the horror elements to it. I loved the mystery behind it. I loved the representation of PTSD in this, and everything about it was just so dang good. And it was twisty, turny. There were some things that you kind of have to suspend your belief a little bit. It was good. But we have couple who is on their honeymoon. They diverge onto a road that none of them planned to be on, or neither of them planned to be on. They find a girl who has been stabbed. They take her to the hospital, and now they are suspects in a murder investigation. And it just goes from there, and it's so good. It's very twisty. I love the way Simone St. James uses the supernatural in her books to kind of elevate the story, and this leans more horror than I expected it to, and I think I tracked it as horror and not mystery thriller, even though it is deemed a mystery thriller. Next, I was having some PCOS issues, and I just needed something that was going to make me happy, so I decided to read You Again by Kate Goldbeck. And this is another Reylo fan fiction that got turned into a book. I enjoyed it. I had a good time with it. I gave it 4 stars, but I gave it 4 stars, I think, because I was already in a really bad headspace, and so I didn't like anything. I feel like it could have been 5 stars had I been in the right headspace for it. But we have a guy and a girl who fate keeps bringing them together. They can't explain it. They met via her roommate once because her roommate was dating him, and there's all different scenarios and how they end up in the same place at the same time, only to find at part of their journey, both of them are in a really bad place. And so they decide, since they're both in this really bad place, they could lean on each other for support and just be friends and get through it all. And they do. Of course, he catches feelings first, and she's very reluctant just because of her past, but it's really cute, and I think it plays out really well, especially knowing what I know of the Reylo dynamic. I think she did a really good job of letting the Rey character have qualms with this relationship. And so I enjoyed that aspect of it too. I don't remember character names, so yes, I know it's Raylo fan fiction, and so I'm just inserting Ray as the character, but I thought it was really good. I thought it was really fun. It gets emotional. It gets pretty deep in places. And we do have a bisexual main character and our female character, and I enjoyed that as well. But yeah, pretty dang good book. The next book on my Patreon vlog would be The Lost Queen by Stickney Pike. This has been on my TBR for so long, so long. And shame on me for not realizing what this was, because it says it in the dang synopsis. I knew what this was going into it, or so I thought, so I didn't read the synopsis. I just knew Arthurian legend and Outlander combined. This is like a precursor to Camelot though, so it's not really the Arthurian legend just yet. And it reads like that. It definitely reads like this is the beginning of Camelot. This is the beginning of the story that we all know and love, given from one of the Druids' perspectives. And I adored it. It was a bit slow. It's very character driven. However, I felt like I was pushed forward by the fact that I love Arthurian tales to begin with, and this having that feeling kept me going. I'm not a character-driven reader, like I said, and so it took me a long time too to realize that this was a precursor to Camelot until I heard Uther Pendragon. And I'm telling you, that doesn't come till like almost the end of the book, and then I was like, oh, this is where we are in the story. But I really did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. Next, on my mission to make myself happy, I read Slaying the Shadow Prince by Helen Schroer, and I have read The Legends of Thesmar, the first book anyways, Blood and Steel, and so I wanted to go ahead and pick this up because it's the enemies to monster lovers that I've read before. Carissa Broadbent has Slaying the Vampire Conqueror. This is another in that series. There are a series of standalones, and they are all in the worlds that these women have already created. So I was excited about this because I'd heard that it was so good, and the Shadow Daddy aspect was well played out in this story. I will agree. I will agree. However, I gave this a 3.5. I didn't love it quite as much as everyone else did, and I think it is because I love Wilder, and while Wilder is in this book, he's not the main character. I did love the main character, but I don't know, something was missing that's not missing in Blood and Steel in this book, and I can't tell you what it is. I just had a disconnect with the book, and that could have very well been my PMDD, because let me tell you, I had quite the week with my PMDD. And I think that maybe if I would have read it at a different time, it would have been a 4, but I still don't think it would have been a 5-star for me. My next 5-star should surprise no one, The Faithless Hawk by Margaret Owen. I have talked about Margaret Owen quite a few times on this channel. She writes really dark YA fantasy, and I love that her books are more about family and survival and friendships and things like that, but they are pretty dark. And in this series, we have a girl who is a crow. They're looked down upon. They are the faction that takes care of the dead in this world, and they take care of the dead because they are immune to the plague. And the plague is something that ravishes all other factions in this world, just not them. And there's a reason for it. We get into that in the second book. I really enjoyed the second book a lot. I do think Margaret Owen is an auto-buy author for me. I do need to get my hands on a copy of The Faithless Hawk. I'm trying to get a hardback copy because I have a hardback copy of the first book, The Merciful Crow, and I just need to buy more Margaret Owen because Little Thieves was also fantastic. I read that last month, I do believe, either that or couple months ago, and I need to read Painted Devils, so that might come up in some other vlog this month, who knows. But I really love Margaret Owen, and I really love this duology. Next would be my Patreon buddy read, and that would be Gods of the Weirdwood by R.J. Barker. Okay guys, this was really good. I have the same problem with this as I do with this. I love R.J. Barker and Anthony Ryan because they do plot and character in equal measure, and Covenant of Steel is very character driven, as is Gods of the Weirdwood. However, I picked this up, and this was the book that flipped the switch in my head that said, I'm not on fantasy burnout. I'm on fantasy romance burnout. I'm missing this caliber of writing. I am missing this type of story. In this book, we have a main character who is known as the Forester, and he has a lot going on in his little journey, his story. I don't want to get too into it because a lot of it I feel like will be spoilers. I feel like that's why this synopsis is so short. I'll read you what this says because I don't want to spoil anything. Kahan is known as the Forester, a man capable of navigating the dangerous forests of Krua like no one else. But once he was more. He was once a warrior. Udini serves the goddess of the lost, a keeper of small and the helpless. When Udini needs to venture to the Weirdwood to find a missing child, she asks Kahan to be her guide. But in a world where land is won and lost for uncaring gods, where the forest is full of monsters, Kahan will need to choose between his past life and the one he leads now. And his choice will have consequences for his entire world. And that is so true. So true. The stakes in here are very big. And I love Udini because she is a hoot and a half. She was my favorite character in this by far. But this does have a very wide scope. It does have very large consequences towards the end of this book, and everything ties together in the end, but it's a very character driven. It's very slow. The writing is impeccable though. The characters are great. There was just a little lack of plot for me. I felt like it was a bit meandering. I felt like we were getting lost in this forest, and maybe that was the purpose because that's kind of what happens in the Weirdwood. People get lost. They lose their way. They lose their purpose. They run into these forest dwellers who kind of try to get them off track even more. And I don't know. There was just something about this that made it less than a 5-star for me, even though 10 out of 10 character, 10 out of 10 atmosphere, 10 out of 10 writing. I think it was just the lack of plot or the lack of a direction in this book that made me give it a 4-star instead of a 5. But it was still really good. You gotta give me some more coffee here. Also, if you have a Quick Trip in your area and you haven't tried the cold brew nitro, it's very good. All right, and next for my Patreon vlog, I read The Women by Kristen Hanna. This is an immaculate piece of art. And I cried. I knew it was coming and I cried. I've read Kristen Hanna before. She has a few plot devices that she likes to use, and I knew what was coming and it didn't matter. I still cried like a baby. This is about the forgotten women in the Vietnam War. And one character in particular who decides she wants to go to Vietnam to be with her brother, but her brother passes away after she enlists, and she kind of regrets the decision immediately. But she wants to be on her wall of fame in her father's study and have her face up there, her name, her accolades up on the wall with the rest of her family who has served in the military. However, it is looked down upon for women to join the cause. It is looked down upon for anyone to serve in Vietnam. And there was a lot of atrocities that happened in Vietnam. They are covered in this book. They are covered by what our character goes through in this book. And then in the latter part of this book, we get to see what happens to our character when she comes home, how she is shunned, spit upon, shamed for her service in Vietnam, or told women didn't serve in Vietnam. And so the PTSD that sets in, the shame, everything like that, it was really hard to read, but I felt like it was a really important story to tell. And I loved this. I have a hard time telling anybody what my Kristen Hanna ranking is because The Nightingale was 5 stars, The Four Winds was 5 stars, this was 5 stars, and all 3 are absolutely amazing. And the Four Winds is very close to home for me because I am from Oklahoma, but I had friends who served in Afghanistan, so I got to hear very similar stories to what was told in here, just as part of what happens in war and the PTSD that comes post wartime and how you just lose yourself in some of these things. And so absolutely fantastic. Highly, highly recommend. Next, I read Full Speed to a Crash Landing by Beth Revis. And this was just a fun espionage story. It was so good. And it just kept my attention the whole time. This is a novella, and this is going to be a series of novellas. I'm going to say that these books are as fun as Murderbot, so that's the only other sci-fi novella that I've read that is this fun and this engaging. I gave this first book 5 stars, but I'm very excited to see where it goes, especially with the ending that this one had. I want to see where the trail leads. I want to see how these things get resolved, but it does say that it's sexy and sexual tension. Sure, there is some, and I don't know that I would actually call it sexy, but it's a fun romp in space with a little hint of romance in it. And then espionage as the backdrop for it all. And I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It was pretty dang good. And I am really excited to see what comes of the rest of the series. And then I read The Jasad Heir by Sarah Hashem. I was kind of just middle of the road about this whole book. I didn't think the characters were anything great. I didn't think the writing was anything great. I didn't think the plot was anything great. And honestly, I don't remember it. I just recently read it and I don't remember what happened. So it was pretty forgettable. I wasn't engaged in picking it up. I was never excited to get back to it. I don't know. It was very middle of the road for me in just about every aspect. I gave it 2.5 stars. And I gave it 2.5 stars, I think, because I was anticipating this book. Like, it was one of my most anticipated reads. And so I just... very disappointed, very disappointed, very middle of the road about everything that was in it. So, and like I said, I can't even tell you what it was about, and I just read it. So that's the easiest way to tell you when a book is mid. And then our final 5-star of the month would be Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Who saw this coming? Nobody, right? Nobody. You guys, this was a surprise, right? Okay, so I loved Part of Your World. I loved yours truly. I have to give it to this one. I think it's the best of the 3. I don't think I would have ever thought that this would have been better than yours truly, because that was probably the best romance I had read to date. And then this one came along and just said, hold my beer. I was like, okay. I think it has to do with the fact that our main character has a lot of PTSD, and I really love stories with trauma representation that's done really well. And then I love the Easter eggs that are thrown into this. Neil makes his return. Hello, Part of Your World. Never thought we'd see him again. And then, of course, the characters from both Part of Your World and yours truly make an appearance in very big ways towards the end of this. And I really loved all the Easter eggs. I love the relationship. I love the PTSD representation. I loved our main male character. He was so sweet. And it's not often that I read a romance where the male character has to take on a father figure unexpectedly. And that is one thing I really enjoyed about this. Like, he's having to take care of his brothers and sisters, and it's something he's not happy about, and it's something that he is having a battle in his own head about, this fact, like, so young, having to become a father without even having a wife. And you know, it's really good. And he's going through some stuff. She's going through some stuff. I really like that about Abby Jimenez. She takes characters who are probably at their lowest and elevates them in like a relationship. And it's because these relationships are healthy why they grow. Sorry, I just got something in my eye and it has halted all thought. Anyway, I love Abby Jimenez. I think she's going to remain an auto by author for me. I would like to pick up her backlist, except for the fact that I've heard that one of the books that she's released in her backlist is not great. I think I'd still try it though, just because I loved this whole series, and I do believe this is the final book in the series, but I will keep reading Abby Jimenez. And the last book that I read is another that I DNF'd, and it is The Hunter's Gambit by Cecile Perlot, yes. Perlot, yes. Anyway, The Hunter's Gambit. I was so excited for this because I'd seen a couple of my friends rate it really high, and I love vampires. So I was very excited to have horrific vampires again, because, you know, Empire of the Damned I love so much. J. Kristoff, I love so much. And whenever I heard, okay, horrific vampires, these vampires are going to eat this girl after 3 days of treating her like a queen, things like that, I thought it sounded really good. I thought it sounded like it was going to be up my alley. I love vicious vampires. I love vicious fae as well. And so I had high expectations for this, but guys, I DNF'd it. The writing was not good. The prose was not good. The characters were not good. The dialogue was awful. And I'm a stickler for dialogue. Banter will get me every time, but if you can't pull it off, it does not work for me. I won't like the book. I won't like the characters. And so I got about, I want to say 30% of the way through this, maybe even 50. I was doing the audiobook, so I'm not really sure where I stopped, but I just got so bored. So incredibly bored because the banter wasn't bantering and the writing was poor, and I don't know. I just could not get into this book at all. I'm still very excited to find vicious vampires in some other format. This was just not it. And I'm going to keep reading J. Kristoff, so I know I'm going to get them from him. But yeah, I didn't like it. Didn't like it. And I think this also kind of put a bad taste in my mouth for fantasy romance because I was already on a fantasy romance burnout. So I don't know how much of it I will be picking up in August. I do still have a lot that I want to read, so don't fear that I'm just going to write it off. But I do have an issue with it right now at this current time, in this day and time. But it might change tomorrow. Who knows? All right, that is my wrap up for July. I do have a Patreon if you guys would like to support me and what I do on this channel. I also have all of my links in a Linktree link down below if you'd like to connect with me in any other way. But happy reading. Have a great day. I hope your July went as well as mine did, even though it ended on a bit of a sour note. And just, like I said, have a great day. Bye.